Hey guys, welcome to the latest episode of the 4040 Vision podcast, the ultimate sports history pod where hindsight is 40/40. Before we get into today's episode, let's pay some bills and hear from our presenting sponsors. What's up, everybody? Welcome to the 4040 Vision podcast. I am your host, Khaled Abdullah, and I'm joined today once again by my fellow host, Sulman Haque. What's going on, man? How are you?
Yo, what up, man?
Not much. So, last week's episode was the NFC retrospective, and this week we are doing an AFC retrospective. So, what we're doing is we're looking back on the predictions that I made along with my buddy Kuz, who's unavailable. So, Sulman is stepping in his place. We're going to look back at the predictions we made before the season, talk about what we got right, what we got wrong, what happened along the way. And then we'll wrap up with the biggest surprises and disappointments in the AFC for the 2023 season. So we'll start out east with the AFC East. The way it worked out was the Bills, Dolphins, Jets, Patriots, with the Bills and Dolphins both making the playoffs. The Jets falling just short, getting eliminated a couple weeks before the end of the season, and the Patriots ending up with the third pick in the draft. Myself and Kuz, we were both aligned with Jets, Bills, Dolphins, Patriots. So we were a little bit off. But we'll start with the division winners, the Bills. So, I know, Sulman, you weren't on the original pod, but I'm sure you had some thoughts going into the season. So what did we get right? What did we get wrong about the Buffalo Bills?
Yeah, I think you guys are pretty spot on about the Bills. You just thought the Jets were just going to be slightly better than the Bills. So I think you guys called it exactly how it was for the Bills. Josh Allen going to have a great regular season. Bills are going to keep doing, what they've done the last 3-4 years. And that's what they did. They made it into the playoffs. They won the division, lost in the divisional round. So that's just how it's been for the Bills for the last few years, and that's what they continue to do. I don't think we saw any kind of growth from the Bills this season. I don't think anything really changed for the Bills. They just been that team they've been for the last 3-4 years.
Yeah, regular season monsters, postseason not so great. I think one of the things that we were both spot on about was that there would be a bit of a fall off for the Bills, that they wouldn't be as good as they had been the past few years. And it was true. For a while there, they looked like they were not even going to make the playoffs, much less be the division winners. They finished the season strong. They finished the season 5-0, so the last 5. They end up with a top 6 offense and the 4th best defense in the NFL, which I think was surprising. This is in terms of scoring defense and scoring offense. I don't care about yards and any other stuff. And yeah, it was really strange because they came on strong at the end. They lost some close games along the way, and they just fell short. Once again, they disappointed like they always do. And I think this offseason, they have a lot more questions to answer in terms of what's going to come next for their future and all that. But I think we were both spot on in that there would be a fall off, and that I think, with a healthy Aaron Rodgers, they may not win this division. So next, the Dolphins. So Kuz and I both had the Dolphins finishing 3rd in the division. I think we both had them as a playoff team, but as a wild card team, which is where they ended up. And I think the big thing that it was contingent on basically Tua's health. And if he was going to be healthy, then they would be a team to reckon with. And both of us did not expect him to stay healthy, but he did. So aside from that, what did we get right and wrong about the Miami Dolphins?
No, I think you guys again were spot on here. Like, you guys called this division pretty well. I mean, the only unfortunate thing happened was, when we'll get to it, is Aaron Rodgers, season-ending injury. But yeah, Tua, you guys said if Tua's healthy, this could be a pretty good team, and that's what it turned out to be. Tua was healthy. This offense was humming. They dropped 72 on the Broncos in a game. They just had an all-worldly, running attack with Mostert and Devon Achane. So, they did well, and I think they would have won the division if their defense was able to stay healthy at the end of the season. I think, they started having a lot of late season-ending injuries there, and the Dolphins kind of fell off a hill the last few weeks of the season, and then, they didn't do too well in the playoffs either. So it was, I think you guys called it how it was, right? I don't think you guys really, you guys said Tua stays healthy, this is going to be a good team, and that's exactly what happened.
Yeah, and like the great irony is that Tua was the one that was healthy, but nobody else was. That
Yeah,
was the funny thing.
exactly.
Like,
Like, oh my god, I mean, their defense was just the guys are dropping like flies on that defense. It's like every week, 2 guys out. Every week,
yeah,
2 guys out, right? They lost a lot of guys on that defense, so it was
exactly. I
hard.
think
And
by the end of the season, they were missing Bradley Chubb, Jalen Phillips. I think Van Ginkel was out. I think he came back for the playoff
Jerome
game, but
Baker, I think Jerome Baker was out,
Jerome
yeah.
Baker, Xavier Howard didn't play in that playoff game against KC. Jalen Waddle missed some games. Mostert did
Mhm.
too. Even
Mostert too,
Tyreek
yep.
Hill sat out a couple games. So it was just wild that literally everybody else was
Everyone but
healthy.
Tua,
Or
yeah.
yeah, everybody but Tua had injury problems. And that's the thing with this team is when things were good, like you mentioned, they put up 70 against the Dolphins. They were unstoppable. When things were flowing, the run game was going, Tua was upright. But then, there was early signs of fraudulence, we could say, because some of the teams, whenever they were going up against a good team, it was like, oh, okay, the Dolphins, they're not who they think they are or who we think they are, and they have some disappointing losses in there to the Titans and some other, mediocre teams. So, when the going got tough, they did not stand, they did not, hold up. But before that, when things were going well, they looked incredible, and they ended up with the same record as the Bills, 11-6. They just lost the tiebreaker in the division, I believe, or they lost the head to head to the Bills because they lost both games to them.
Mhm.
But I think they'll come back next year, and if they can have a healthy defense, then I think they'll definitely make noise next year.
Yep, I agree with that. They just gotta add a few more pieces on defense, for sure.
Yeah, and not blow out their ACLs or Achilles.
Yes, yeah,
So,
that too, and keep protecting Tua.
yeah, exactly that too. Next up, the New York Jets. This team, I feel bad. Kuz is a hardcore Jets fan. He was very excited before the regular season. We talked a couple weeks before things kicked off, and everything looked great. The defense was going to be dominant. The offense was going to look great with Aaron Rodgers. He did raise some questions about the offensive line. Obviously, the Jets did not end up winning the division as we predicted. So, besides the obvious, what did we get right or wrong about the New York Jets?
I mean, you guys were spot on about that defense, right? That was still a pretty good defense. I mean, they still almost willed them into the playoffs with Zach Wilson at the helm, and I think what they started Trevor Siemian. I don't know who else they started to try start a bunch of guys. What I guess didn't make sense was why they stuck with Zach Wilson and didn't try to go get someone like a Carson Wentz or someone like that, like who'd give him a slightly better shot, right? That made no sense. And they were like banking on this, like, oh, Aaron Rodgers might return in the regular season. I'm like, that would be insane. Dude has an Achilles injury. How is he going to return
Mm-hmm.
in the regular season? So I think maybe some questionable decision making at the beginning in terms of let's bring in a quarterback that is probably better than Zach Wilson. Like they were like, oh, Zach Wilson's the guy. We're going to stick with him. And turned out he was the guy we've seen the last
Yeah.
2-3 years, right, with the Jets.
Mm-hmm.
He's not. He's a bust, right?
He's not
And
the
so
guy. Yeah.
he's not the guy. And again, it's going to be the same story for the Jets coming into this offseason. Is Aaron Rodgers healthy enough to do this? He's on the wrong side of 40 now, and he has coming off an Achilles injury, right? So
Mm-hmm.
that's going to be tough for the Jets. I don't know if they're going to get the same Aaron Rodgers that they thought they were getting before the season started. And so another question mark at quarterback for the Jets
Mm-hmm.
again.
It was just one of the most bizarre seasons from start to finish, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he comes out 4 plays. It doesn't look great because the offensive line is getting destroyed by the Bills D line, and just 4 plays in, it's insane.
He's gone. He's gone.
He's done. And I don't know if you watch Hard Knocks. I watch Hard Knocks. I bought into the Aaron Rodgers. He's turning a new leaf. He's going to lead this team. He's going to bring and it was crazy how excited the guys were. They kept talking about we got 8, and it actually inspired me to do one of the shorts, which was the kind of intangible aspects or benefits of playing with a GOAT, and just the confidence and basically the confidence that the defense and the rest of the team was going to have just by having Aaron Rodgers on this team versus a quarterback that you were going to second guess like Zach Wilson or any of these other guys. And 4 plays in, just absurd.
Yeah, yeah.
One of the
I mean, I watched a little bit of Hard Knocks and like I bought into the hype too. I was like
Mhm.
drafting like random Jets wide receivers, like that undrafted rookie that was getting so much play on Hard Knocks. I was like, oh man, Rogers is gonna throw him the ball for sure. He's gonna kill it. I forget his name now, Jason Lee something or something. I forget
Mhm.
his name, but that's how
I
much.
mean, I
Yeah,
was a believer in Garrett Wilson. I
yeah,
was like, oh, this guy's gonna
yeah,
have
100%.
1,800
Brees
yards,
Hall.
15,
Yeah,
15 touchdowns, all that. And
yep.
you brought up a really good point about the quarterback position and just their I don't stubbornness, arrogance. I don't know what it was, but everybody knew. The entire football world knew Zach Wilson is not the guy.
Yeah,
If
I
he was
mean,
going to have,
I feel like at least Carson Wentz would have had you maybe at least 2 more wins at least with Carson Wentz, right? Like, they lost some games because of Zach Wilson's stupidity.
there's a world where they sign Carson Wentz and they win 11 games. They won 7
Exactly,
games with
exactly.
with a combination like of Zach Wilson, Trevor Siemian, the other guy that from UConn, I don't even remember his name, like
Yeah,
Aaron
I
Rodgers'
don't even know.
buddy that
Yeah.
started a game. And yeah, I mean, not even Carson Wentz. There's other guys out there. I
There's so many
believe
other
Joe
guys, so many
Flacco
other guys.
turned them
Yeah,
down.
Flacco was there. Yeah, Flacco
I
turned them
think he
down.
turned them down from what I read is he didn't want to go back there. But you could have traded for somebody, Jacoby Brissett. I brought up Davis
Mhm.
Mills as a potential
Yeah.
option from Houston. I don't
I
know.
mean, you could have
There's
taken a shot at I guess Trey Lance was traded by then, but they could have taken a shot on Trey Lance, but
yeah. I mean, there's just anybody. Just give him a chance. Let's see
yeah.
what they can do. I don't know. PJ Walker was out there. So I don't. It doesn't matter. Just somebody. Josh
Yeah.
Dobbs.
Josh
you
Dobbs,
know?
like, I mean, he could have gotten them to 11 wins.
Yeah, when he was good, right? Like at that
Yeah.
that little peak. But yeah, they still end up. They have the 29th ranked offense, obviously, but they still have the 12th ranked defense. Which obviously these things kind of go hand in hand. Uh, and just really unfortunate. I was bummed to see it. You never want to see a guy like that go down. But injuries happen. It's just a really shitty way for it to happen and the timing of it. But at least he'll have the full year to recover and all that, and maybe he'll bounce back and then have a strong 24 season. Last but not least, actually last and least, the New England Patriots. They finished the season 4-13, about where we predicted. I think we thought between 4 and 7 wins, something like that, just based on Bill Belichick and kind of patching things together. They end up with the 15 ranked defense, which I think is pretty good considering they had the 31st ranked offense. But did we get anything wrong about the Patriots, or are we pretty much spot on here?
I think pretty much spot on. Probably not many people thought this would be basically this is it. This is the end of the Patriot era. The dynasty is done now for sure, right? People thought that when Brady left, they kind of hung in there a little bit, and now Belichick's gone. It's the end of the Patriot way here. Maybe they reinvented somehow with Jared Mayo at the helm, but it was just an awful season. Mac Jones looks like a bust. I mean, talk about a really bad draft class. We'll have to go back to that draft class someday. But wow, already kind of 3 QB busts, right? And
Mm-hmm.
there's a 4th one looming in Justin Fields.
TBD on Fields,
TBD,
but yeah, I think
TBD on Fields. Yeah,
we saw things coming. I think some people thought they could sneak into the playoffs, but I think there was more homer talk and
yeah,
just belief in
yeah.
Bill
And I think your
Belichick.
boy Kuz, he called it out. Like, what are they doing signing Juju Smith-Schuster, who was horrendous, right? He called that out. You guys called that out. It
Mm-hmm.
was bad. Like, they're just
Yeah.
making weird signings, and like the offense was terrible.
Mm-hmm.
They couldn't do anything.
They completely regressed in every single category, every way, and it was just a kind of hard to watch.
Yep.
Next, the AFC West. So the way the AFC West shaked out was Chiefs, Raiders, Broncos, Chargers, and both Kuz and I were wrong except for the division winner. And we both went Chiefs, Chargers, Raiders, Broncos. So, we obviously picked the division winner correctly. Everybody else, a little mixed up. But we'll start with the Chiefs. They finished 11-6. They are in the Super Bowl, as many of us predicted, or many of us, expected. So, did we get anything wrong about the Kansas City Chiefs?
I mean, yeah, I think it was. I guess it was hard to foresee that the offense taking a step back, right? I think most people, you think Kansas City, you're like, oh, Mahomes is just gonna get them to 11 wins automatic, and it felt like this year it was more the defense was getting them to those wins versus Mahomes. And that's not something we've ever seen in Kansas City. But nonetheless, they somehow got the 11 wins, got into the playoffs, beat up on teams in the playoffs, and now they're back in the Super Bowl. So I mean, you guys kind of called, KC's kind of the best team in the AFC. That's what they were. Just a little different way than we thought it would be.
Yeah, definitely a different recipe. They end up with the 15th ranked offense in terms of total points, and the second ranked defense.
That's impressive. Wow.
Yeah, it's like you said. I mean, it was just a different approach to things. It used to be, Mahomes and Tyreek Hill and Kelsey and just, throwing the ball 50, 60 yards downfield, and you're dominating teams, by 30, 40 points. This year, their point differential was only 77. They had a quote unquote down year where they only won 11 games instead of 13 or 14. And it was just, there was weeks where the offense just could not do anything. And it was really hard to explain what was going on. It was just a disconnect between Mahomes and his receivers or the coordinator, or, drop passes, big primetime mistakes. We saw the Bills game where they had that big mistake. The Packers, another big mistake, that, big drops, things like that. But still, when it came to like nut crunch time, it was Mahomes and whoever else, and Kelsey, they stepped up, and Kelsey had a huge game against Baltimore. And I think we were just both banking on pedigree, just saying this is the best quarterback in the league. This is the best quarterback in the division by far. And it's just, they ended up where many people predicted, but just not in the way that we predicted. So,
Yep.
Next up, my Raiders. So we both thought that they would be third in the division. I think I was leaning about 6 to 7 wins, something like that, based on preseason predictions. They end up 8-9 with a point differential of 1. They end up with a top 10 defense, which was not expected, and the 23rd ranked offense, which was sort of expected. But what did we get right or wrong about the Raiders?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the defense was a lot better than expected. Even you, as a Raiders fan, didn't expect this top 10 defense out of them. I think, just firing Josh McDaniels like really opened things up for them. Like that guy is, I mean, I'm not a Raiders fan by any shape or form, but my God, that guy was a moron. I don't know how he keeps getting head coaching jobs in the NFL. It's just a connection thing. But I think that's exactly kind of what freed up the Raiders with Antonio Pierce, taking over. He kind of, that defense seemed like it was playing a lot better. Even the offense seemed like a little better with Aiden O'Connell, even though Jimmy G was hurt. But I mean, I think that, nobody expected the Raiders to have that good of a defense, and I think that was really the key there. And then also the offense opened up a little bit after Josh McDaniels is gone.
Yeah, I remember Kuz making kind of a joke where he was like, imagine they finally get a good defense or a top 10 defense, something like that, the year after they get rid of Carr. And this guy, Carr's tenure was basically 25th or better, or worse, sorry, I should say, in terms of scoring defense. They had one good defense in 2016 where they were like middle of
Yeah,
the
can you
pack.
imagine if they kept Khaled? Well, man, you might have been in the playoffs.
Well, I don't know. Maybe they don't end up firing Josh McDaniels if Carr sticks around.
Yeah, that's
because,
fair. Okay, I get. Yeah, you have
Jimmy
to fire
G
Josh.
was
Yeah,
was beyond terrible. I mean, he was everything that I predicted about him and his health and his struggles. I never thought he was a good quarterback. And on top of that, he's always injured. And, lo and behold, he
always.
gets pretty much hurt in week 1. And just after that is never fully healthy and misses some key games and gets benched for the rest of the season for a 4th round rookie. So what I did not expect was the Raiders to fire Josh McDaniels midway through the season and for Antonio Pierce to revitalize the team. That's why I was thinking, this is going to be like a mediocre 6-win season where you kind of just trudging along, just, winning one game every 3-4 weeks and just keeping, you're basically on life support for the whole season, but you still have enough talent to not completely bottom out and be like 3-13 or something like that. And so it was just, an unexpected change and a good change, I'm kind of looking back, like wishing we lost a few more games so we could have a better draft pick.
Yeah, because I mean, you guys are basically you need that quarterback, right? And
Yeah.
that's what's going to propel this team. So I don't know, maybe it's a veteran guy like Kirk Cousins coming in. We'll see.
Eesh. I heard he's asking for $45 million a year, and
Yikes! Yikes! I mean,
he's
yikes!
37 coming off an Achilles. So I don't know.
Yeah, no, maybe
But at
not.
least Jimmy Garoppolo is not going to be my quarterback next year. There's rumors of a Justin Fields trade. I'm not the biggest Justin
that would be.
Fields
I
guy.
mean, I would take that at least ride him for a year, see what he does, and then
Yeah,
you know,
at the very least, it would be fun. Watching
I
him.
mean, it's an upgrade over Jimmy G and Aiden O'Connell.
It is indeed. But like I said, it would be fun. I'm not big on him
It'd be
as a
fun.
quarterback, but he's a fun guy to watch, and
Mm-hmm.
he'll be the most exciting Raiders quarterback in a while. So I don't know. We'll see what happens next year.
Yep.
Next up, the Denver Broncos. We both predicted them to be the bottom of the division. They end up 8-9 with a minus 56 point differential. Their defense is 27th overall. They bounced back a little bit, but I think a lot of that had to do with the 70 points they gave up to
Yeah. You don't recover from
Miami. Yeah, and they had a 19th ranked offense, so they were okay. In both categories. But yeah, they end up 8-9. They bench Russell Wilson for the last couple games of the season. And yeah, so what did we get right and what did we get wrong about the Broncos?
Yeah, I guess Russell Wilson was not as bad as you guys were thinking. He was okay. He wasn't the same Russell Wilson, but he was definitely better than last year's Russell Wilson. So maybe some of that has to do with Nathaniel Hackett and whatever he was doing there in Denver. But again, even the Broncos at some point are like, you know what, we're kind of over Russ. And looks like they're going to cut him here at the end of the season. So he was just, I don't know where he finishes in quarterback. Like if you look at his QBR where he finishes, but I think he's like probably like slightly like like below average. Like he's not top 15. He's probably below that top 15 mark, but probably in the 17, 18 range. So I think really that was it. And that was the reason why the Broncos were a little bit better than expected, but also because the Chargers had some injuries and they just really sucked on their defense. Like you guys will get into that. But I think you guys kind of were spot on with everything else with the Broncos, just an average team. I think who's kind of picked him to finish last because he was pissed off at Sean Payton. But I mean,
Yeah.
you could have seen them finishing last in this division or third in this division, whatever. But 8-9, I think 8 wins was exceeding expectations for the Broncos this year.
Yeah, at some point they were 0-5 and they bounced back and there was some playoff buzz, so credit to them, credit to Sean Payton for bouncing back. I didn't think he lost his fastball basically as the coach. I thought he could still coach, and he wasn't out of the league for that long, and he just clearly did not like Russell Wilson, and Russell Wilson is just not the same guy. It's not breaking news.
I think Russ might be done with his career here. I think Broncos cut him. I don't know if another team takes a chance.
I think he can sign for basically the vet minimum because he's still owed a bunch of money from the Broncos. So that's what the rumors are. Is that people are saying the Raiders are looking at him
I heard
as
that.
Yeah. That veteran option. If they do pick a quarterback in the first or second round. I mean, I'm not excited about that, but I would understand if they did it for, again, like a very cheap, $2-3 million a year, because he is making that, whatever 30-40 million that he's owed from the Broncos. So he may take a cheaper deal. There's a lot of places he could end up. I think he still has something left in the tank, but he's just obviously not the same guy that he was.
Yeah, 100%.
All right, the Chargers. So we definitely had higher expectations for the Chargers. They are generally the offseason champions. People are always picking them to do better than they actually do. They underachieve. They end up 5-12, bottom of the division. They're picking in the top 5, top 10. They have the 24th ranked defense. They gave up 63 points to the Raiders. Brandon Staley gets fired. Their GM gets fired, who actually is now the GM of the Raiders, so I'm not quite 100% sure how I feel about that. But yeah, Justin Herbert gets hurt in the middle of the season. He's put on IR, but even before his injury, they were definitely underachieving and they were on the downside. So I don't know, instead of 5 wins, they maybe get 7 if Herbert is still around. So it's probably better off for them. what this kind of reminds me of, I know the cap situation and all that is not that different, but the year that Jimmy G blew out his ACL and you guys end up picking, you as a Niners fan, you guys end up picking second in the draft and you pick Nick Bosa. This reminds me of that, is that they already have their quote unquote franchise QB in place. I know Jimmy G's not a franchise QB, but he was your option back then. So this reminds me of that. And even Joe Burrow, when he got hurt his rookie year, they were able to kind of bottom out and just use that pick to draft. They drafted Jamar Chase. You guys, in your case, drafted Nick Bosa. So this reminds me of that situation. But I've talked too long about the Chargers anyway. So what did we get right? What did we get wrong about the Chargers?
Yeah, I think obviously you guys had a lot higher expectations than everyone does every year, right? Like, oh, the Chargers, they're so talented. They got talent on defense, they got talent on offense, and then the season comes and that talent doesn't play like everyone thinks how talented they are. So I think that was the problem. Like the defense was just bad. Like outside of Derwin James, everyone looked bad. Even Joey Bosa looked bad. Khalil Mack looked bad. They didn't
Khalil
look
Mack,
great,
wait,
right?
hold on. Khalil Mack had like 17 sacks.
Did he have 17 sacks?
Yeah.
Holy crap. Okay. All right. Well, I don't know. I mean, okay. These guys
But
just
I
didn't
get it.
look
I get it.
like as a whole, as a unit as a whole, they didn't look good. Like maybe he had 17 sacks, but like there were times where he was just getting burned on the edges, right? So I think the talent is there. I think Brandon Staley wasn't a coach who can get much out of that talent, like for whatever reason. Like I mean, they should have there shouldn't have been any excuse why they weren't a top 5 offense or a top 10 offense at a minimum, right? They had all that talent. Keenan Allen, Justin Herbert, Austin Eckler, Mike Williams. They drafted a guy, Quentin Johnson. Like Quentin Johnson looks like a bust based on last season. So that's what I'm saying. Like all that talent on that offense, all that talent on that defense, and I think they got the right coach. They got Jim Harbaugh. They got a nice draft pick. They're gonna turn it around, kind of like the Niners did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they always, like we said, the offseason champs, they have a bunch of talent on paper. They end up falling short because a lot of it is coaching, or most of it, I think, is probably coaching. I mean,
yeah, 100%.
Brandon Staley, I never liked him as a coach. I thought he was not up for the job. I mean, he made it pretty clear early on that he's kind of in over his head. He probably got the job too early. I think he was only the DC in LA with the Rams for a year.
Yeah,
and then he gets the Chargers job.
He's relatively young.
Yeah, exactly. He's like mid-30s. I think the fact that they hired Harbaugh, and I'm not sure what the contract details are, but he's probably getting a ton of money, represents like a big change for the Chargers. And that was one of the reasons I thought they were not going to get Harbaugh or Belichick, because they're usually pretty cheap. But then I found out that they have some crazy deal with the Rams where they pay like, I don't know, $1 or something for the lease, just kind of some like honorary figure. And
it's something crazy. Yeah, it's something crazy. It's like they're basically getting a free stadium.
Exactly. They don't have to pay for anything. The Rams are covering it, and the Rams just wanted like a tenant basically to use the stadium when they're not using it, so they can get some of the benefits or revenue, the fee, maybe the parking fees. I don't know, whatever the hell it is.
They get there's some sort of revenue arrangement where it all goes to the Rams and Chargers don't get it, something like that.
Exactly. So basically, this cheap ass organization gets this incredible windfall as a neighbor or tenant with the Rams, and now they have all this money to spend.
Could have been the Raiders.
It could have been, right? But we're nobody's second fiddle, so maybe a little bit in the Bay, but at least Vegas is ours. We don't have to worry about. But LA is still a Raiders town. I mean, there's always the joke, right, that the Raiders get 9 home games a year because that one game in SoFi against the Chargers is, at the very least, it's like 50-50 Chargers Raiders.
Yeah, for sure.
Especially if the Chargers were bad. I remember San Diego.
It's like Niners Rams. It's like Niners Rams too.
Exactly. You guys make the same joke. It's Levi South. Like
exactly. Yeah.
It's Allegiant South. Same thing. Yeah. So I mean, it's a big change for them. I like Harbaugh. I would have been happy with him as the coach of the Raiders. Now we find out, did the game pass him by? It's crazy that he's been gone for 8 years now. He's at Michigan for 8-9 years. Like it does not feel like it's been that long, but it has been a very long time. He left 2015, so it's been a while. So we'll see if the game has passed him by and if he can still coach it up. But he will, at the very least, be an upgrade over Brandon Staley. So they just underachieved, and they'll be able to reload this roster. Next up, the AFC North. I know coming into the season, we both talked about how this was going to be the best division. This is going to be the toughest division, that this might have been the toughest division in the NFL, and it ended up being insane, insanely competitive. All 4 teams end up over 500, which I think is like maybe the first time this has ever happened, or the first time it's happened since like the 60s or something like that. So the way that it shook out was Ravens, Browns, Steelers, Bengals. And both Kuz and I were a little bit different. We had the Bengals winning the division, the Ravens finishing second, the Browns finishing third, and the Steelers finishing last. So we will start with the Ravens. They end up 13-4. They have a plus 203 point differential. Just an absolutely dominant team in the regular season. The 4th ranked offense, the number 1 defense. What did we get right and what did we get wrong about the Baltimore Ravens?
Yeah, I think you guys were pretty spot on there with the offense being really good, and that's what they were. They were really good. But I think you guys had some questions and concerns about the defense. And like you're like, oh, Clowney, that signing's not gonna matter, that kind of stuff. But man, that defense was nuts. I think that was really it, right? Their defense really showed up in the regular season. They showed up even in the playoffs, but they just couldn't get over the hump over there against KC, which many people expected them to come out and dominate KC. But for whatever reason, I mean, the Ravens really really good team. Surprised they didn't end up in the Super Bowl. I think you guys are spot on the offense. Maybe just missed a little bit on the defense there, but it's hard to say, right? Like nobody thought Clowney signing was going to matter for the Ravens, and it turns out it was a huge signing for them.
Mm-hmm.
And some of their guys that nobody expected to step up, like McQueen, he stepped up, right? And those kind of guys, they stepped up. So they got a lot out of that defense.
Yeah, we definitely did not expect their pass rush to be as good as it was, just because they don't have like a star guy on that team. I know Clowney was probably the biggest name on there, but it was like a collective effort where they just completely dominated teams with that defensive line. And Michael McDonald, who is now the head coach of the Seattle Seahawks, I don't think any of us saw that coming. It was his first year as a DC, so he stepped up in a major way. Like you said, we knew the offense was going to be good, and we don't need to delve into why they lost to the Chiefs and all that. But I think it's fair to say that given how the regular season went, it's definitely a disappointment for them to lose in the way that they did, and it's going to be tough to bounce back next year. Losing a coordinator is a bigger deal than I think people make it out to be, especially somebody that was as successful as he was. So I think they did benefit a little bit from some of the injuries and the other issues, in the division. So now they get to deal with probably a healthy Deshaun Watson and a healthy Joe Burrow again next year. So it's definitely not going to be as straightforward as it was this year. And this year they went 3-3 in the division. So it's not like they dominated the division. So next up, the Cleveland Browns. So Kuz and I both had them finishing third, but I think we still had them as a playoff team. They end up 11-6 by some miracle, with their 5 starting quarterbacks and all that craziness. So what did we get right and wrong about the Cleveland Browns?
Yeah, I mean, I think their offense ended up being a lot better than anticipated, especially after Deshaun Watson gets hurt and Joe Flacco comes in and is dropping like 350 yards on these other teams. It was. I think that miracle was Joe Flacco, right? I think without him, they missed the playoffs, and I think you guys are spot on that. Hey, they'll get into the playoffs. They'll be a wild card team. You guys call that, and I think you guys are just expecting maybe a little bit more from the Bengals, obviously, who had some major injuries there. But I think, yeah, I mean, pretty good offense, pretty solid defense. This team, I don't know if Deshaun Watson does better than Joe Flacco did, but we'll see. They're a pretty good, strong team. I know they can give teams problems with their defense, and they were putting up points with Joe Flacco at the end there. So I think they kind of struggled out the gate a little bit with Deshaun Watson, it felt like, but I don't know if that guy was ever completely healthy. Because it looked like he was just like right off the bat, he had some elbow injury, shoulder injury, things like that. So.
And it was a really weird situation with him because he had the elbow injury the shoulder injury, and he was like not on the injury report that he was expected to play. And then the day of, he's like, oh, I can't play. Then they end up starting the rookie. And then a few weeks later, he's put on IR. So it was a very weird situation.
Super strange. Yeah.
I've made my feelings clear. I really dislike the guy. I hate him, to be completely honest. I don't think he should be in the NFL, but even when he was playing, he did not look like the same guy. He looked a little bit
He
slower.
didn't.
He's just not
Mm-hmm.
not as accurate as he was before, not as dynamic. The best thing he's got going for him is he's, I think, a little bit bigger than he wasn't obviously in college, so he's a little stronger in the pocket and stuff like that. But he was just turning the ball over, and it was just a very weird situation. And again, somehow, obviously with the Bengals injuries and some other stuff that went their way, but they started 4 different quarterbacks. And
It's crazy,
somehow,
right? You think, I mean,
you
Deshaun
know,
Watson, Dorian Robin, like they started a rookie, PJ
yeah.
Walker, they started, and then Joe Flacco, right? It's insane.
And then Joe Flacco comes off his couch and they go 4-1 to end the season.
Yeah.
And they had it was a really weird defense because I remember when I was reading up on them before the Texans game, the playoff game, people were saying they had, or not people were saying, but the stats were like they had an incredibly dominant defense at home, but they
Yep.
were well below average on the road. And it
Yeah.
was
I
a
think it was
really
something like they're a top 10 defense at home and like a bottom 10 defense at away.
exactly. And that's why they end up 14th in scoring defense. And I'm sure some of that had to do with having these quarterbacks that were constantly turning the ball over, because all 4 of those guys were just throwing picks and fumbling
Yeah.
left and right. The only difference was that Joe Flacco would step back and throw a 60-yard bomb down the field
Yeah.
to Amari
Like,
Cooper or
damn,
something
Joe
like
Flacco
that.
can still do this.
I think he'll be like 70 and he'll still be able to throw it 60, 70 yards on his knees
Possibly.
or something. So yeah, just a weird team, and that ended up right about where we expected them.
Yeah.
Next, the Pittsburgh Steelers. We had them, basically propping up the division, and I shared a stat on that podcast that they had not finished last in the division since like 1984, something like that. That streak continues. They end up 10-7. They make the wild card round as I believe the 7 seed. They have the 6th ranked defense and the 28th ranked offense. So what did we get right, and definitely what did we get wrong about the Steelers?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I was with you guys, and I was like, yeah, the Steelers are gonna suck. Kenny Pickett, he's not a real quarterback. He doesn't belong in the NFL. But despite all that, Mike Tomlin finds a way, man. He comes up with the top 10 defense that carries them for most of the year. Uh, I mean, I don't think I personally thought they had no business being in the wild card slot, but somehow they made it there. I mean, they're starting Mason Rudolph right at that point. It's like, yeah, they're not going to win this game. They're going to get flamed out, and that's what happened. So I think surprisingly, that defense really carried them all season long, and that wasn't something anyone expected, right? That yeah, even with like a bottom ranked offense, the defense would carry them, and they're going to win games that they shouldn't be winning, and that's what happened. They won games they shouldn't have been winning, and somehow, despite Kenny Pickett, and despite the flaws in that offense, they make the playoffs.
Yeah, they won some games they shouldn't. They definitely lost some games they shouldn't too.
Yeah, they lost to the Cardinals. I remember that.
They lost to the Cardinals at home. They lost to the Patriots, I believe, at home as well
Yep.
on Thursday night. But those Thursday night games are always weird. It's just it's so wild to me. Like, I get why Kenny Pickett was starting. He's a first round pick. There's some politics involved. You need to know for sure 100% whether he's the guy or not. I think they know that now. Hopefully they should know that by now. You chalk up his rookie year struggles. Okay, he's a rookie, whatever. This year, I think in 2 years, I'm pretty sure he's been the starter. He has 14 touchdowns, something insane like that. And now, after he got hurt, how do you, as an organization, see Mason Rudolph and Mitch Trubisky in practice and think, yeah, Mitch Trubisky's the guy
I
we're
don't.
going to
What I
start?
never understood was how they thought Mitch Trubisky would be the guy. I think last year they signed him, and there was like
Yeah,
rumors, oh, the Steelers were going to trade for Jimmy G or something like that, and they never did, and never came to fruition. I'm like, how do you decide Mitch Trubisky is the guy you want starting? Like they decided that last year, and they kept him, and they still thought he was a
yeah.
starter.
He stepped in a few games last year, when Pickett had his, I think, concussion issues. But I just don't understand. I mean, I know they end up winning 10 games. Maybe they win another 1 or 2, which is just insane to think. I think Mitch Trubisky went 0-3 as a starter. But yeah, it made no sense once Mason Rudolph was in there, and he was okay. He looked pretty good. There was a couple games where he was lighting it up. They go out and they beat the hell out of the Bengals, and that was a bit of a surprise. But yeah, it was just a weird organizational choice to say, we've had Mason Rudolph in house for 3-4 years. We kind of know what he is, but Mitch Trubisky, yeah, that's the guy that's going to save our season after Pickett went down. Just very bizarre. But they're the Steelers. They keep moving on, and now they're going to probably go out and get Justin Fields or Kirk Cousins or
They'll get someone.
Jake Browning. I don't know, somebody like
I know.
that. But
they'll
they'll bounce
talk Big
back.
Ben out of retirement.
Yeah. But yeah, they'll still win, 9 to 11 games and be a wild card team next year as well. And then last, the Cincinnati Bengals. We both predicted them to win the division. They went 9-8. Joe Burrow misses most of the season. I think my concern coming in was he already had a calf issue coming into the season. So I was worried. I think I mentioned in our fantasy pod about Jamar Chase was going to be a fantasy bust because of Joe Burrow's issues. It was kind of the case. He had some big games, but
He was
anyway,
up and down. He was up and down.
Yeah. So they end up, bottom of the division, but they're still over 500. They went 9-8. So what did we get right and what did we get wrong about the Cincinnati Bengals?
Yeah, I mean, obviously you couldn't predict, right, Joe Burrow, getting injured for the rest of the season. I mean, even the games where he played initially, he looked a little shaky, right? Like it looked like they brought him back a little too early. Then he kind of has a few big games, one against the Niners and a couple other teams where he looks pretty good, and then his season ends, right? He gets season-ending injury. So I think no one kind of you can't predict that, right? Joey B gets hurt, and then the offense takes a step back. T. Higgins looks pretty bad too, even with Joey B playing. That was kind of like T. Higgins regresses in a contract year, which was a shocker. Jamar Chase kind of regresses a little bit. I think their defense regresses a little bit, but somehow they're still on the cusp right there of the playoffs with Jake Browning stepping in at some point.
Mm-hmm.
So they still kind of hold their own for most of it. And so with the healthy Joey B, they're right back at the top again, I think.
Yeah, exactly. And they probably wish that they lost some more games so they could, because that's what happened the rookie year or his rookie year, right? He played 10 games and then they end up, picking in the top 5 and they get Jamar Chase. So yeah, we definitely could not have predicted that Joe Burrow would miss basically not the entire season, but most of the season with a slew of injuries. But that's kind of becoming his thing now. It's been 3 years in the league, right? And 2 out of the 3, he's not been able to finish the season because of different injuries. So, mark that as that's a potential cause for concern for him.
Yep.
We'll say that. But I think the story
or
of
maybe
the season
they just need a better line to maybe protect the guy.
They tried. They spent a ton of money. Yeah. They got Lyle Collins. They got Orlando Brown from the Chiefs. Yeah. They spent money. It just hasn't worked out for them. But I think the story of the season was, of course, Jake Browning, right? I mean, personally, I was like, okay, they're going to bottom out. I know who this guy is. He's an accomplished college quarterback. I remember he made the college football playoff with Washington, but like, oh, this practice squad guy, like, who the hell is this dude? He's not going to do anything. And he ends up being pretty damn good, and I don't know what's going to happen with him long term. I don't know if maybe they're thinking, well, with all the injuries that Joe Burrow has, maybe we should prioritize keeping this guy because obviously he's good enough. But yeah, I mean, they lost their OC. He's now the coach of the Tennessee Titans. So there's going to be some changes there, and they definitely need to fix that defense. But yeah, just an unfortunate end to their season. They were, like you said, in the mix until basically the very end, and they fell short with a couple losses at the end there. But Jake Browning, yeah, who knows? Potential franchise quarterback for somebody else.
Maybe for the Raiders.
I thought about it. I need to look at his contract situation and be like, is he available? Because I know they signed him on and off the practice squad, but honestly, man, I mean, he looked great.
I think he was drafted in the 6th round, so he could.
Yeah, Sacramento kid. He's kind of a local kid, Northern Cali guy. Who knows, right?
Who knows?
Yeah. So the last division here, the AFC South. This is the one that we got completely wrong. With good reason, I think. So the way it shaked out was Texans, Jaguars, Colts, Titans, with all 3 of those first teams finishing over 500 and the Titans finishing 6-11. The way that we predicted it was basically completely upside down. Kuz went Jags, Titans, Texans, Colts, with the two of those at the bottom two basically interchangeable. And I went Jaguars, Titans, Colts, Texans. So again, both those two teams basically interchangeable at the bottom there. So obviously, we got a lot wrong here. We'll start with the Houston Texans, who end up winning the division, winning a playoff game in the first round. What did we get right and wrong, mostly wrong, about the Houston Texans?
Yeah, I mean, I think you guys had some faith in CJ Stroud, so that was good. But nobody expected CJ Stroud to come in and light up the league like he did. Nobody expected that Texans offense. I think they finished number 13 here in points scored. So nobody expected that out of them, right? And their defense was just as equally as good. I think they finished like 11th. So I think we just underestimated the Texans. Everyone underestimated D'Amico Ryan, CJ Stroud, that defense. They were pretty good. And I mean that offense, my goodness, like they were lighting teams up at certain points in the season. So I think really solid season, really good building season for the Texans, and they're just going to keep building on that, and they got their franchise guy in CJ Stroud.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we definitely had faith in CJ Stroud. I really liked him coming out. I thought that coming into the draft, I thought he was the safer pick over Bryce Young. I thought, maybe
Same.
Bryce Young, maybe he has the higher ceiling if he is a better athlete than he ended up being. But I thought, CJ Stroud should have been the first pick in the draft, and I was hoping
100%.
the Raiders would get him or Anthony. I thought Anthony Richardson was a more realistic option for the Raiders, who ends up going fourth, but we'll talk about him in a little bit. And yeah, I think, like you said, we underestimated that offense. We didn't think that he would come in and be basically a top 5, top 7 quarterback. Like, he doesn't throw an interception for the first 6-7 weeks of the season. He leads the league in 300-yard games in a league with Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Patrick Mahomes, all these
Hurts.
superstars. And he has the most, and obviously his weapons. We did not expect Tank Dell to be as good as he was, Nico Collins, all these other guys.
Devin Singletary.
Yeah, Devin Singletary, of all people. I'm sure a lot of people spent a ton of money on Dameon Pierce as they're in their fantasy pick, myself included. Ends up being Devin Singletary is the leading rusher. And yeah, they basically have top 10, top 15, or basically top 10 units in offense and defense. CJ Stroud even misses 2 games. They still end up winning 10 games in a topsy-turvy division. And really, like, the sky's the limit for them. I can't believe that, as someone that hated Deshaun Watson and the Texans organization for enabling him, it was hard to watch. I'll admit, it's just proof once again that karma is not a real thing in sports.
Or in the world.
Maybe in the world. Maybe there's a better case for that, but definitely not in sports. But anyway, yeah, they were the big surprise of the year. Next, a disappointment. The Jacksonville Jaguars. We both thought they would win the division. They were in the mix until the last week of the season. They end up 9-8 and out of the playoffs. What did we get right and what did we get wrong about the Jaguars?
I think Jacksonville it's kind of interesting. I don't know. I think their offense is pretty good, and then they kind of fall off there at the end. Trevor Lawrence gets hurt a little bit. Same with their defense. They kind of regress in both areas, whereas you guys were expecting some progression from them in both in offense and defense, and they kind of regressed. Trevor Lawrence looks like he kind of regresses this year, even though he gets another weapon in Calvin Ridley. Doesn't really have a connection with him. I know this, drafting Calvin Ridley in fantasy everywhere. Doesn't have really a connection with Calvin Ridley, and Christian Kirk doesn't really play to that level he played last year. So the offense regresses. Etienne Jr. looks pretty good, but that's about it. That defense looks okay, slightly, probably an average defense, but I think the year before they were almost like a top 10 defense. So just regression in areas nobody expected, and you can't really blame injuries too much on this. Like, to just regress for some reason.
Yeah, you can blame injuries at the end. It was pretty clear after the Bengals game that Lawrence was not healthy after he turns his ankle, gets rolled up. But yeah, they're definitely a candidate for most disappointing team in the AFC, despite finishing above 500. But yeah, they regressed. The Calvin Ridley thing was just a huge mystery, and I think they have like all these pieces and all this talent, but they just ended up being basically an average to slightly below average team, and that's what cost them.
Yep.
So another
100%.
surprise here, the Indianapolis Colts. We both had them, finishing in the bottom of the division. They still finished third, but they were 9-8 over 500. Definitely did not predict that. So what did we get right and what did we get wrong about the Indianapolis Colts?
I feel like Anthony Richardson played really well coming out the gate. He gets hurt, but their offense was pretty good even under Gardner Minshew, which is kind of a surprise a little bit after Anthony Richardson gets hurt. Their defense was actually pretty solid. So I think you guys maybe thought, Anthony Richardson comes in, he's going to struggle as a rookie, but I think even Gardner Minshew comes in and he leads them to, I think they finished as a top 10 scoring offense.
Mm-hmm.
Is that right? Yeah. So their offense was really good, and that kind of carries them here a little bit, and gets them over the hump, even when their defense kind of struggled in certain areas and at certain times. But I think the offense was a lot better than expected.
Yeah, they had some weeks where the offense or the defense looked great, but they end up finishing 28th in points. So kind of all over the place. But basically, yeah, they were an very strange team because they lose Anthony Richardson early, even though he looks great. They were without Jonathan Taylor for most of the season. Then he comes back, and then he's gone again. Then he comes back. So they just kept plugging guys in. And Minshew, who's probably the best backup in the NFL. I mean, you can make a case for some other guys, but probably the best backup quarterback in the NFL. I think the Raiders probably make the playoffs if they sign a guy like him.
Yeah.
So the Colts are lucky they had a guy like him to keep their season alive. Shane Steichen, I think, is getting a lot more credit for the Eagles season in 2022 than he did originally because of how good this Colts team looked with him and how bad the Eagles looked without him. So, coordinators matter, and they have a bright
100%.
future. And I think this should be a really exciting division next year. I think this is going to be just as competitive as the AFC North, with the top three teams, at least the Titans.
I agree.
We'll see.
Yeah.
All right. The Titans, we thought they were going to finish second in the division. We had them as maybe a playoff team. They end up 6-11. They fire head coach Mike Vrabel after 2 difficult seasons. They have an average defense and a terrible offense. Derrick Henry's probably leaving too. So this is a big, big change. A new era is coming to Tennessee. I think they're getting a new stadium too. But anyway, they finished 6-11, like I said. So what did we get right? What did we get wrong about the Titans?
I think Ryan Tannehill was kind of the piece where you guys were like, oh, he'll be Ryan Tannehill, average, slightly above average quarterback, and he just looked horrendous this season for whatever reason. The offense looked really bad. The offense struggled a lot of games, and then they put in Will Levis. He looks okay at times, but he also struggles a little bit. The defense is just okay. I think the offense was just really, really bad, and you have a guy, Derrick Henry, who was just putting up empty numbers, but he was putting up numbers, and they still couldn't win games. So,
yeah, one of the disappointments of the year, I think. Will Levis, he came out his first game. He throws for 4 touchdowns. He looks like the best quarterback in the NFL, the best quarterback in his draft class. They beat the Dolphins, which was a big surprise, but I think eventually they kind of settle into place. But they do play spoiler the last game of the season and beat the Jaguars to keep them out of the playoffs. So, Mike Vrabel currently does not have a head coaching job. I don't think he will this season. There's rumors that he's going to take over the KC job after Andy Reid retires after the Super Bowl. So we'll see what happens in about a week or two.
We'll see.
We'll see. But I think he's a really good coach, and I think he basically made the most from a bad situation, and they overachieved with the talent that they had, and despite finishing 6-11. So
100%, and I think they're going to do a complete rebuild out there now.
Yeah, Derrick Henry's gone. He did set his goodbyes. He's probably going to Baltimore or something like that. So who was your biggest surprise of 2023 in the AFC?
I would say it's the Houston Texans, right? Did not see that. Like, I was with you guys. I'm like, okay, yeah, best case scenario, they're maybe third in that division. Maybe if everything goes really badly in that division, they can finish second. But to finish first, to finish in a playoff spot, that was a complete shock to me. And so, big ups to D'Amico Ryans for coming in, turning this franchise around. getting the guys he wanted. They traded, they got CJ Stroud, they got Will Anderson Jr., and that kind of set the tone on both sides of the ball, and they got a really bright future here.
Yeah, it's hard to pick anybody else. You can maybe say the Steelers, but
maybe, yeah.
You know, they have the infrastructure. They're a known commodity. You know, T.J. Watt and that defense, Micah Fitzpatrick. Okay, you know, Mike Tomlin's never had a below 500 season, so it probably would have been a bigger surprise if they were below 500 and finished last in the division. So, yeah, it's got to be the Texans, with the Colts being a close second, because you know they were right there.
Yep.
They're
They were right there.
A drop pass, maybe. I think they were on like the 15 at that point. Could have won that game. Could have made it into the playoffs themselves and won that division. So, I'd say the Texans for sure, because they also won a playoff game, and then the Colts, a very close second. Biggest disappointment of 2023 in the AFC.
Ooh, yeah, I think it's between the Chargers and the Jaguars. Chargers, obviously, because how talented they are, and they just finished really poorly. Like, obviously, in some injuries with Justin Herbert towards the end there, but they weren't looking that good anyway. So Chargers were a team you expected to maybe even win, like challenge the Chiefs for the division, and then the Jaguars, just because they missed the playoffs and they were in the playoffs last year, and they kind of just regressed. With can't really say, like, you can't put too much of that on injuries. You could say, okay, yeah, Trevor Lawrence got hurt the last 2-3 weeks, but outside of that, they didn't look like a playoff team most of the season.
Yeah.
So it'd be between those two for me.
Yeah, I think the non-injury related disappointment for sure is the Jaguars, because, you know, obviously injuries happen, but you have most of your key guys for most of the season. So you expect, you know, especially after that huge playoff win against the Chargers last year, you're expecting more from them. And they obviously fell short, and, you know, they basically choked the last game of the season against a very bad 100%. Titans team. And then the Chargers, probably the injury one. But even, like you said, before Herbert, and we've talked about this a lot, but basically even before Herbert got hurt, That's a fun sentence. They were a disappointment, and they end up, you know, bottom of the AFC West, but now they'll draft some game changer and probably challenge for the division next year with a competent coach. So that's it for the show. Thank you guys for checking us out. Please make sure to like and subscribe and leave us a review wherever you're listening to this podcast. Make sure you hit that subscribe button if you're watching this on YouTube. Got a lot of good stuff on YouTube and Instagram and TikTok and all these other places. And the username on all of those is @4040VisionPod. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Sulman. Appreciate you, man.
Peace.